On this Monday night, a murderous attack police say was motivated by hate. 3 generations of an Ontario family run down, targeted because of their Islamic faith.
Our hearts are broken.
The calls to treat it as terrorism. Thousands of Indigenous children still being taken from their homes.
And the whole point of it is to remove you from your community and from your culture.
Is foster care the modern-day equivalent of residential schools? Plus, a monumental movement at a Canadian university. New anxiety about adverse reactions, how the Pfizer-BioNTech shot may affect some teenagers, and the mission to unlock a wartime mystery.
Think about the families.
The unknown soldier who could be Canadian.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Sometimes there are no words to describe human behavior. We begin tonight with an act of hate in London, Ontario. 4 members of a family have been killed in what police believe was an intentional act, targeted because of their Islamic faith. The 5th family member, the youngest, a 9-year-old boy, survived. He's in the hospital. Police say the family was out for a walk yesterday evening when a pickup truck mounted the curb, hit them, and kept driving.
There is evidence that this was a planned, premeditated act motivated by hate.
Let me be clear. This was an act of mass murder perpetrated against Muslims, against Londoners, and rooted in unspeakable hatred.
A 20-year-old man has been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Police say terrorism charges are also being considered. These murders are clear evidence racism is alive and well in this country. Jeff Semple has our top story tonight.
5 family members were out for their regular evening walk on Sunday in this quiet suburban neighborhood when police say a pickup truck sped toward them, mounted the curb, and mowed them down.
The pickup truck continued to drive southbound on Hyde Park Road at a high rate of speed. It was observed to turn left on Oxford Street, not stopping for the red light.
Officers eventually caught up with the truck about 7 kilometers away and arrested the 20-year-old driver. Police say he was wearing a body armor-like vest and that this was a deliberate, planned attack.
We believe that this was an intentional act and that the victims of this horrific incident were targeted. We believe the victims were targeted because of their Islamic faith.
Paige Martin says she was driving nearby when she saw the wreckage and paramedics performing CPR.
I'm still in shock. I am very shaken up. Knowing that, there's a kid, multiple kids, it's awful. This family's just out for a walk.
The victims, 3 generations of the same family. 4 were killed, the youngest, a 15-year-old girl. Her little brother, just 9 years old, is now in hospital and is expected to survive. He's just lost a grandparent, his parents, and a sister.
Once I learned, it totally, destroyed me from inside. I can't describe it in the words. I even saw them last on Thursday, and I can't really come to the terms that they are no more here. Like, such a nice family, one of the nicest person I can say like I have ever known.
This news was absolutely gut-wrenching and has shaken not just me personally, but the community to the core. It's a loss of life that is absolutely tragic, senseless, and so cold-hearted.
The driver had no criminal record, and London police wouldn't say why they believe this was a targeted attack. They're now liaising with the RCMP and deciding whether to pursue charges of terrorism. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
According to the latest data, which is from 2019, hate crimes in Canada are on the rise. Police reported incidents increased 7% compared to the previous year. Violent hate crimes rose by 8%. While there were fewer incidents targeting religion, hate crimes against Canada's Muslim population rose by 9%. Canada's last residential school closed in the late 1990s, but thousands of Indigenous children are still being taken from their families and communities. According to the 2016 census, 52% of children in foster care across Canada were Indigenous. In some provinces, the ratio is much higher. In Manitoba, Indigenous children make up 90% of the nearly 10,000 children in care. In Saskatchewan, it is 80%. In a way, foster care is an extension of the residential school system, and it's also leading to multi-generational trauma. Heather Yourex-West reports.
Troy Bird was taken into Canada's child welfare system when he was just 10 months old.
I went through 2 foster homes and went through a hotel system for almost a year.
The grandson of a residential school survivor, Bird believes it is not a coincidence that so many Indigenous children are now growing up in foster care. Ashley Buck agrees.
The whole point of it, and like, of course, like you'll hear the government say, like, we're trying to protect them, we're trying to take care of them. But like the whole outcome and the whole point of it is to remove you from your community and from your culture. And that was also the point of residential schools.
Buck, a member of the Mishki-Ogamong Ojibwe First Nation in Ontario, was taken into foster care as a baby, fostered and eventually adopted by a white family in BC.
I didn't know about this until I did a Freedom of Information request for my files, but my bio family on my mom's side and on my dad's side both tried to adopt me and weren't approved.
In Canada, an Indigenous child is 14 times more likely to enter the child welfare system.
The reason for that overrepresentation is poverty, poor housing, caregiver substance misuse related to mental health issues, and domestic violence related to the multi-generational trauma.
Trauma that is undeniably related to the legacy of residential schools. Both Buck and Bird are grandchildren of residential school survivors. But it's not the only reason why so many Indigenous kids are being taken into care.
We need to get education, early childhood programs, mental health programs, all of that stuff, because that will build a foundation for families to be successful and for more kids to grow up at home.
I feel like it would have made a difference.
While it's too late for his childhood, Bird says he wants to someday have children of his own, raised far outside the child welfare system, surrounded by family at home. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
In Toronto, a statue of the namesake of Ryerson University will not be restored or replaced. It was defaced and pulled down on Sunday. The statue of Egerton Ryerson was doused with red paint and then toppled from its base. Its head was severed, taken to the harbour and lowered by rope into the water. Egerton Ryerson is considered one of the architects of Canada's residential school system. There have been widespread calls, including from faculty and students, to go a step further and change the name of the university. Eric Sorensen explains why the past is driving these demands for change.
A task force examining the legacy of Ryerson University's namesake is to make recommendations in September. One decision was just made for them. Protesters gathered at the statue of Egerton Ryerson on Sunday, and then some hauled it down. 73 years after the institution was founded, one Indigenous student watched it happen.
I was blown away. It was very moving. And it was community who took it upon themselves to, deal with the problem.
Following the news of children's remains found at the residential school in Kamloops and the role Ryerson himself played in developing residential schools, the university's president declared in a statement the statue will not be restored or replaced. Other potential changes include consideration of the university's name, now under review by the task force.
He is the architect of the residential school system. And how harmful that is to both Black and Indigenous people because of the segregated schooling that happened here in Ontario and across the nation.
The statue is gone. Some university publications are also expunging names like the Ryersonian. And what could it mean for degrees conferred in his name? It's another reason to change the school's name altogether, says this faculty member.
It's very painful for those of us who are Indigenous that are working and going to school at Ryerson to have a degree with Ryerson's name on it. It needs to be changed to something much more positive.
Before Confederation, Ryerson was admired for his vision of public school education, but he also backed a separate education that became a guide for the residential school system that tried to erase Indigenous culture. Canadians need to re-examine the legacy of their historic figures, says one Indigenous studies professor.
People that Canada has long valued as important people in the development of Canada as a nation were also people who were very much involved in the colonial project and in the subjugation of Indigenous people in Canada.
At Ryerson University, a place of honor for the statue of its namesake has been removed for good. The name of the university itself may not be far behind. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
In Ontario, a man who threw a trailer hitch from a moving car at an Indigenous woman has been sentenced to 8 years in prison. Barbara Kentner suffered severe internal injuries. She died 6 months after the attack in January 2017. 22-year-old Braden Bushby was convicted of manslaughter last year. Evidence given in court revealed he was drunk at the time. In her ruling, the justice told him he had minimized women, disrespected them, and made them feel unsafe. Your actions, she said, are an affront to all women. Cases of postpartum depression are on the rise in Canada. Nearly a quarter of mothers who recently gave birth say they're suffering from feelings consistent with postpartum depression. And a new study reveals how the pandemic has made it worse. Jamie Morocker explains.
Soon after Heather Eldebs gave birth to her firstborn son, she began to feel anxious.
I wasn't able to sleep. I wasn't coping.
The Toronto mother was diagnosed with postpartum depression and anxiety, a battle she would have to face a second time after having her daughter.
When you experience any sort of even mild anxiety, depression, sometimes you feel very trapped and isolated.
For new parents, that feeling has been exacerbated thanks to the pandemic. A study in the Canadian Medical Association Journal reveals between March and November of 2020, mental health visits during the first year after giving birth were up 30% compared to pre-pandemic.
That's 9 months consistently of seeing elevated clinical diagnoses, people visiting the doctor and getting diagnoses of postpartum depression, anxiety.
Psychiatrist and lead author Dr. Simone Vigod says a lack of in-person interaction plays a large role.
With the onset of all the containment we did with the COVID-19 pandemic, people didn't have their support systems when they had a baby.
And while COVID may have cut off much of our in-person communication, it has allowed for some flexibility.
With 90% of health appointments now online, but Vigod's data revealed something experts say is troubling.
Not everybody is increasing care, such as people who are living in low-income neighborhoods.
Dr. Ariel Dolphin has been at the forefront of perinatal mental health in Canada and says the study highlights gaps in our system she hopes are investigated further.
Did they have less access to technology and thus less access to virtual care? Do they have less access to healthcare providers?
Now out of her deep depression, Eldebs hopes for greater awareness about the illness.
There is hope and you will get better.
Urging families to seek care, pandemic or not. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
New concerns about the Pfizer-BioNTech shot. Coming up, the potential rare side effect in some teenagers. Plus, high hopes, a billionaire's plan to ride his own rocket. Moderna is asking Health Canada to approve its COVID-19 vaccine for use in teenagers. The company says a U.S. trial of 2,500 youth aged 12 to 17 shows the vaccine is over 93% effective against the virus. The Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is the only one authorized for use in Canada on teenagers now. Both companies are testing their vaccines on children as young as 6 months. Researchers are studying a possible link between mRNA vaccines and an increased risk of heart inflammation. A small number of young people, mostly teenage boys, have developed the condition after their second dose of Pfizer-BioNTech. It is rare, and a link to the vaccine has not been proven. Infectious disease experts are gathering more data. Crystal Gamansing reports on what is known so far.
Can you tell me your birthday?
Yeah, November 1st, 2003.
As vaccinations increase in the under 18 population, a potentially new and rare adverse reaction. Medical teams are noticing some young men ending up with inflammation around the heart, causing chest pain and shortness of breath. Myocarditis is noted by the Canadian Pediatric Society as a possible side effect of mRNA vaccines. Canada's top doctor, Theresa Tam, last week said a few cases have been reported.
We currently do not see any higher rates than would be expected in the general population, but it is something that we need to continuously monitor.
An overview of 7 cases in healthy American males aged 14 to 19 appeared in the journal Pediatrics. The authors want increased awareness and monitoring. It says all cases in this report occurred after the second vaccine dose. Fortunately, none of our patients was critically ill, and each was discharged home. The American Centers for Disease Control first noted reactions in late May and launched an investigation.
Very rare. We've vaccinated millions of people, millions of kids, and this is only a small signal, a handful of cases that have occurred in the United States.
In Israel, 275 cases of myocarditis have been reported out of roughly 5 million vaccinations. Israeli officials say there is a probable link to the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Pfizer says a link has not been proven. When 12-year-old Hayden Erdell went for his shot recently, it was his grandmother, a retired nurse, holding the needle.
I trusted someone to get it, and it makes me safer and the people around me safer.
Canadian officials say they are watching for reports of this rare adverse reaction. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney apologized today, admitting he organized that dinner in the Sky Palace. He says it was a working dinner that didn't always follow his own government's COVID-19 rules. Kenney was photographed with several cabinet ministers and advisors on the balcony of an Edmonton building known as the Sky Palace. He said today his government has to set a higher example.
I thought it was prudent and compliant with the rules to do this outside, but it's clear that at some points in that evening we were not all distanced from one another by 2 meters, and I truly regret that.
Got her. I got you.
Still ahead, a bold river rescue to save a 4-legged friend. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos is reaching for the stars after he steps down as CEO later this summer. The multi-billionaire says he will ride a Blue Origin rocket into space next month, part of the first crew on board. Bezos says it's been his dream to travel in space since he was a kid. He's invited his younger brother, Mark, to join him. Air Canada says senior executives will be giving back their bonuses. In a statement on Sunday, the airline said its president and CEO have chosen to voluntarily return their 2020 bonuses and share appreciation units because of what they call public disappointment. The statement did not include whether middle managers whose bonuses accounted for over $8 million would be returning their bonuses. Top executives and managers were paid a combined $10 million in bonuses. And last week, the finance minister called that compensation inappropriate. Air Canada got a multi-billion-dollar pandemic bailout package from the federal government. Some quick-thinking kayakers in Alberta have saved a moose calf caught in a fast-moving river.
Hey, buddy, hey. It's okay. Pretty cold.
The kayakers say they accidentally startled the calf and it fell into the Sheep River just outside Calgary. The men got out of their kayaks, grabbed a rope and pulled the young moose across the river to safety. The calf was shaking and worn out. The kayakers believe it was just a few weeks old. They named her Mindy the moose and sent her on her way, hopefully back to mom. Next, a Second World War mystery. Is this American war grave the resting place of a Canadian? If we could rewind 77 years, we'd be leading the newscast with the storming of the beaches in Normandy, France. It was the Second World War when Allied forces launched the invasion of German-occupied Western Europe. One way to slow down the Nazis was to destroy their oil refineries, but many lives were lost, including a Canadian aircrew. It's believed their remains were only just discovered. Mike Armstrong explains.
Bomber Command are out in great force. One of the targets for Allied bombers in the Second World War was oil refineries. Take one out and you slowed down the Nazi war machine. Some of the most important facilities and the most protected were in the heart of Germany. That took Allied bombers over the village of Auerstedt. All these decades later, there is a grave in the local cemetery. The tombstone reads simply, "An unknown American soldier killed in March 1945. Well, researcher René Schutz says that engraving doesn't add up. Schutz is with a group that studies crash sites in central Germany. They focus on one project each year. This year, it's been that grave. According to witnesses, and there is one still alive, the body that was buried was a man who jumped out of a Lancaster bomber. His parachute didn't open. There are parts of that plane at the crash site outside town. Parts, Schutz says, prove the aircraft was a Lancaster. The problem is, Americans didn't fly that plane. Because of the date of the crash and the location, Schutz came up with a theory. He believed the body was likely Canadian. Well, with permission from local authorities, his group dug up the grave earlier this spring. Not only did they find a complete skeleton, they also found a box. Inside were more human remains. Schutz believes locals collected the remains of the rest of the crew from the crash site and buried them in the grave. Now, they also found what may be an important clue. Canadian airmen wore identity discs, kind of the dog tags of their day. Well, Schutz's team recovered what appears to be a part of a disc with 3 letters, CAN for Canada. Schutz says it was emotional for his team, finding what may be evidence to help prove his theory. German authorities now have the remains and will do the initial testing. They've notified the Commonwealth Graves Commission, but Ottawa hasn't been brought in as of yet. Well, military historian David O'Keefe says it's still early, but could be good news.
Well, if all the evidence is there and it does conclusively prove that this was the aircraft, this is huge. And not just for Canadians and for Canadian history, but think about the families.
Schutz does believe he knows which aircraft and crew he's found. Based on the location and the date, there is one that fits the bill, officially classified as lost without a trace. He's holding back, announcing which crew he thinks he's found. The men have descendants spread out across Canada. And Schutz says he wants to make sure he's right before they're told. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Monday. We leave you with the growing memorial in London, Ontario, where 4 members of a family were murdered as they went for a walk, targeted, police say, because they were Muslim. There are no words. Thanks for joining us.